comparison you have just made, and I'm happy that we have another opportunity to listen about the mobile phones in Haredi society. And our next speaker is Dr. Hananel Rosenberg. He's a senior lecturer in the School of Communication at Ariel University, and today his topic is Haredi approaches to mobile phones and the internet. So please, בבקשה.
טוב, hello everyone, שלום לכולם, שומעים אותי? בסדר?
Can you hear me? Yes, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to share my presentation with you now. So I'll speak in Hebrew today, and my presentation is directly related to the intriguing presentation by Fabian, but I want to start from the disaster that took place at Meron Mount. Like any disaster that Israeli society and ultra-Orthodox suffer, it leads to a very fixed dynamics, and because ultra-Orthodox Haredi leadership tends to look for the reason, the cause for the disaster. So last year, I guess some of you saw all sorts of statements by the Haredi leaderships and rabbis about the need to study Torah more systematically, to be modest amongst the Gur rabbis. They had a dispute about this lecture that was giving about how can we learn or lessons from the disaster, because in recent years there has been some split amongst the different streams. So he said, this rabbi, that perhaps they should not boycott all sorts of streams that left the community, and as expected, smartphones and internet were also mentioned in this context of the disaster at Meron. Last weekend, I went to visit my parents who live in Givat Shaul neighborhood in Jerusalem. Most of this neighborhood is populated by the Haredi, and I came across this announcement, this pashkvil. This is a letter from the greatest rabbi, and this letter is about the tragedy in Meron and what can we interpret from it. They say, and we do not have a prophet. No, but we don't have a prophet. We can't know what was the cause for this disaster, but it's probably because of our sins, and we must look into our sins in order to find out what caused it. And we should actually think very hard about the potential or the all the sins that actually led to the disaster, and the sins are also related to usage of internet and smartphones. And of course, they say that we, as all the Haredi community, should be more strict. And who actually wrote this announcement? Some of the greatest rabbis that lead the Haredi public. I was interested when I saw this poster. I found that they also sent this one in the WhatsApp groups. There is a very important comment here at the end, but this announcement is not just, one more announcement similar to the previous announcement and pashkvils that have been present for 20 years. It refers to a very specific phenomenon related to what is to the contemporary public, Haredi public, and COVID. So you talked about the way the Haredi society refers to technologies, new medias. It's very complicated. At the beginning, there was an attempt to totally reject, to ban internet and smartphones, but later they understood, following all sorts of pressures that they were under. And besides, today, every human being must have access to the internet. So they changed their attitude to a certain level. And we can see that indeed in recent years, there has been a diffusion. It's very slow and gradual, of course, and there are different layers about the approach to internet and smartphones. When I say multi-layer diffusion, it means that there is certain access to internet, but a major part of this accessibility is not from Orthodox households, but in workplaces. And secondly, there are still populations such as, or groups of population, for example, amongst the Lithuanians, all these yeshiva guys and scholars who are married, they do not have such vast accessibility to internet, but the new Haredi, as were mentioned before, and have more access to internet, and the highest success of the campaign against internet and smartphone is of actually preventing access to smartphones amongst teenagers and children. They really do not use internet and smartphones. Rarely use them compared to other groups. So if some statistics, before COVID, we saw 50% of ultra-Orthodox population declares that they have no accessibility at all. And some of them, about a third, said that the accessibility is only from the workplace, and 72% declared that they have, almost 3/4, that they have a kosher phone, and not a smartphone. And some others say, so there is diffusion, very slow diffusion, which is not actually applied across the whole community as equally. And then COVID came, and it created a mess. And to be more accurate, it created a challenge. The beginning of the pandemic, there were all sorts of voices that declared that, or predicted that COVID is about to be the doomsday of the ultra-Orthodox society with regards to digital, but because we cannot imagine surviving this year without access to internet, Zooms, smartphones. How can a society live at the time of pandemics, at the time of lockdowns, without this connectivity? So now, when we are in a way almost, when the COVID is almost behind us, we try to look back and see what happened. So I want, in short, not to actually to propose some 4 question marks, 4 questions, main questions, of this related to this connection between new media, COVID, and the ultra-Orthodox community. And one of the most intriguing questions is perhaps to answer them. The simplest question, the first one, what has changed in terms of usage pattern of digital during COVID? Is it true to say that more and more Haredi purchased smartphones? So during the first lockdown, we saw that indeed the ultra-Orthodox population used more smartphones. We talk about 47% who declared that their usage of internet, increased a lot. And also we can see it in Bezeq, the telephone company reports. They talked about an increased volume of usage. And these figures talk about an increase amongst those who were connected in the first place. But how about those who didn't have access before the pandemic? And here we can find more complex findings. On the one hand, there is this survey that was conducted by the survey company. So on the one hand, we can see that there is no rise in purchasing smartphones amongst Haredi population. Those who use smartphones use it so much more, but those who didn't have smartphones did not buy them. But we can see a rise when it comes to the internet usage. We can see a decrease of about 15%. So the diffusion, as I said, is slow. Every year there is a rise of 10%, a growth of 10%. But after the COVID, there was 15% more. I started using internet from home as a result of the pandemic, and most of these 15% are those who did not use internet at all, and that's a very interesting figure, amongst the 15% who just started using internet in the past year, in addition to the slow rise every year. We know that most of them are Hasidim, conservative, and young. They did not have access to the internet, but now they started using it for work purposes. One more point, which is, I think, the most critical one, and at the beginning, they also thought it was the critical one. E-learning, a significant rise of internet usage amongst the general public actually increased significantly because of e-learning. And ever since the beginning of the pandemic, we could see so many Zoom projects. For example, even the greatest of the rabbis, the greatest yeshiva leader, Rabbi Gershon Adelstein, he gave online lessons, online sessions on Zoom, and the Lithuanians actually taught on Zoom, and there were other projects as well for e-schools designated for the Haredi public, or projects designated for children and teenagers, like meetings with writers. There is a meeting with a Haredi writer. And there is also the Achvat Torah organization, which is a community network for Haredi families. And they launched so many e-learning projects. The Haredi leadership saw these projects taking place. And just in the midst of the crisis, they launched their counter campaign to stop this trend. They wanted to emphasize that Zoom is not legitimate, and parents should not let their children participate in Zoom sessions. This is one example of a poster of a pashkvil against it, and you can see an announcement by the Rabbis Committee on Communication Affairs. So the official committee, which is responsible for kosher cell phones program, they also alert people against the rise in using the internet. And then another initiative by the committee of rabbis, another committee of rabbis that alert parents not to allow this accessibility to the internet. But in practice, it seems that it's very different, because a study that we conducted with the Ministry of Education, we tried to examine e-learning amongst the Haredi population, and we found out that the percentage, a very small percentage of ultra-Orthodox households used Zoom, and they didn't do it, particularly with children. You can see this slide, the prevalence of using e-learning channels during COVID time. We can see that in schools and yeshivas and seminars for girls, high school for girls, we can see that the main channels of learning were almost only through synchronized or non-synchronized lessons on the phone or through worksheets. Only 14% out of the Haredi population used Zoom during the COVID pandemic. When I say only, it's quite a significant figure, but if I say only because when we go deeper into it, you can guess, as Fabian said, that amongst these 14%, we know that most of them, of the users, were from the Chabad group. They belonged with the Chabad group, that in the first place, they are more actually prone to use technology. And compared to the Hasidim, amongst all these 14, only 4% of them used internet. And I would like to emphasize that the usage of Zoom is when we ask the parents how they felt about e-learning through worksheets and phone, whether it was effective or not, they said that it was hardly effective. They just told us during interviews and questionnaires, I'll just say it, I'll just tell you what they told us in a non-academic way. They said that they suffered. The parents said that learning by the phone was really, it was a headache, nothing works technically, and the ability to sit down and listen to a recording of a lesson for 40 minutes, it was totally disastrous. But still, they did not use the Zoom, they did not use Zoom. Almost did not use Zoom. So that leads us to the second question. If this is what happened during COVID, what would be the long-term changes? What we saw that certain families actually started using the internet, about 15% of them that actually started using the internet. And we saw a rise amongst those who used the internet in the first place. So during the pandemic, they started using it much more. So now we want to ask about the future. Do we think that this crisis will create or lead to a long-term change? Because COVID was compared very often to the Gulf War, the first Gulf War. That was a turning point when ultra-Orthodox families started listening to the radio. They needed to listen to the radio to get the instructions and alerts and warnings about the missiles from Iraq. And the Gulf War was really a turning point. And from then on, the Haredi population started using the radio. So we wanted to check whether the pandemic actually will bring about a long-term change, and perhaps we will see legitimacy that did not exist before. That is one of the most intriguing questions, really, and I don't think that we have a clear answer. We will need to check it in the future and to see whether the change will remain for the long run. But I do want to give you two examples. When we ask those who first connected to the internet during the pandemic, those tens of thousands who got internet connection at home for the first time during the pandemic, when we ask them, how did you connect? So note that a high percentage of them, significant percentage, about half of them, about 50% of them connected through NetStick. What is a NetStick? It's a USB connector. They didn't connect to Wi-Fi or internet cable, but they just bought this NetStick, a USB, a physical component that is connected to their computer. Some of them did not buy it, but they received it from all sorts of charity organizations. They just borrowed it. There were organizations that actually provided these net sticks for very low price. So the net sticks, of course, will allow you, it's not only temporary connection, and it allows you to control, because only the mother or the father connects the net stick to the computer. So they still have the control, because their children cannot do that. And of course, when you get disconnected, it's very easier. And when we ask them specifically about that, they tell us, when we ask them whether when we ask all these 15% who got connected to the internet, so we can see that 9% of them said that they are not going to use it after. I'm sorry, we asked this question, everybody was connected to the internet. So 9% of them said that they are going to disconnect after COVID. So it's quite a significant share of the population that claim that they are not going to use the internet after the pandemic. Regarding the two last questions, I'll do it very, very quickly. The third question is related to actually the relationship between digital and traditional media. And here I truly think that this might be the more significant, one of the most significant changes in previous studies made, for example, by Dr. Oren Golan and Shauli, and other studies by Bade showed us that the news channels the ultra-Orthodox news channels like a website like Haredi 10, Kikar Shabbat, ultra-Orthodox websites are different from printed ultra-Orthodox media. So they usually deal with all sorts of topics that are considered taboo in printed press, but they have their own limits. They do not want to challenge the basic values, for example, criticism. We won't find criticism on the digital channels. They won't criticize the mainstream rabbis, not at all. But there is no doubt that COVID, which created a challenge or to the status of the leaderships, and not only the politicians, they harm the way they treat, that the rabbis are treated amongst the Haredi population. The question is what happened in the digital platform, but in some of the digital website, there was criticism. You could find criticism during the pandemic, and and certain statements which you couldn't even dream about beforehand, all of a sudden started to appear on those websites, in these channels, criticizing the ultra-Orthodox leadership, complaining that there is a shortage of leaders. And I think that this is a very important point. When we look at the figures that showed us a rising, growing increase in consuming news through digital channels. So they tend to actually consume the news through these platforms, through these channels. These channels became a type of a political public space. And it also relates to what happened in Meron. So we find news about Meron, and we found unprecedented criticism against the leaders, or the shortage of leadership amongst the ultra-Orthodox public. So perhaps this is a very, there might be, we might expect a turning point here. And last point, please. Yes, I have 1 more minute to go. So that's exactly what I need. A last point, and I think that's the most intriguing one, is the position of alternative media. Alternative, I don't mean news channels, but I actually mean Telegram or WhatsApp groups. And here the question of what is the relationship between the various functions of the traditional media channels and new media channels and the alternative digital space. So we are familiar with studies about using WhatsApp in emergencies, like this study, for example, that talks about the importance, the huge importance of protective edge. I'm sorry, of WhatsApp during protective edge. We know that there are already WhatsApp groups, and with many members. And here there's another study that talks about it, very interesting study by Oren Golan and Shauli, a pioneer study that they managed actually to become members of these WhatsApp group, and they showed that they talk about political issues and they talk about updates, and usually it's all under the radar. And here, of course, we have to examine what is going on in these groups, whether in pandemic these groups became more popular because they offered alternative news that were not reported in more traditional ultra-Orthodox communication channels. So just last statement, this whole subject of how the ultra-Orthodox behave during pandemic, we can actually there are several narratives about it through their function of the political leadership that more or less collapsed, or perhaps we can think about how the municipal leaderships behaved. And I think that they were very significant during the pandemic. So it all helped us to see what happened amongst the ultra-Orthodox public during the pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rosenberg, for the very informative lecture. And now